Hey guys, cheers for tuning to another video. This time we talk about what Blizzard put out not that long ago, around about December 19th, of their post, what they call the Road Ahead 2024. What we received is more than I would have ever anticipated. At this particular point in this video, I just want to go over that we've basically reached the end of the main narrative campaign of World of Warcraft Dragonflight, which includes the last raid tier has been cleared. Everyone can see the story, complete the campaigns that go into it. So we're essentially done with Dragonflight. We've done the main aspects to it, but obviously historically with World of Warcraft, what we've always had when it's come to these end of expansion cycles is once the last raid drops that gets cleared, we historically on rare occasions had a patch with some kind of content, and then the pre-patch, which sometimes includes, if not all the time includes, the class changes going into the expansion, including some story. However, before we just get into that roadmap, just to go over that, I just want to go over the text, which a Holly Langdale at Blizzard, the Warcraft manager, I believe is their position, has written this up, and I'm just going to commend her. She's done a good job of bringing Warcraft to where it is now, where we ended on Shadowlands, which Shadowlands was not a great experience. BFA wasn't a great experience, and I'm going to be completely honest, Legion had its issues. It had good content, but it had a great cadence at the time actually, but it was the start of what I would consider the initiation of WoW's further downfall, which was integrating systems into the narrative campaign or the narrative experience of World of Warcraft going forward. So the systems were tied directly to it, the core systems, and you couldn't separate them or rip them apart, unfortunately. I think they could have pulled a ripcord, if I want to quote Blizzard. We see there that they have delivered on their previous roadmap. They've delivered that content, they gave it us in good time in all honesty, and they added a little bit of extra that they didn't announce, which is all positive. I think we all can be grateful for that. I'm only talking about modern World of Warcraft here. I'm not going to dive into too much of classic. That will come either in a separate video, or I'm just going to touch on it on the end. We'll see. To me, they've delivered the entirety of Dragonflight. You cannot dismiss that. You cannot argue with that. They've delivered on what they set out to do. Post here goes on about they still have more content to come in Dragonflight. Like I said, the main narrative campaign or the main narrative aspect to Dragonflight has ended. The main content has dropped and being played as we speak. But what's different here is what they've announced, which was quite surprising to me. They've given us the 2024 roadmap, which still includes additional patch drops that we're going to get at Dragonflight. Now, this is far beyond what I was expecting. I don't think a lot of people were expecting this amount of drops until the expansion actually drops, or pre-patch in some cases, but it's really solid. We've got what they call a Season Renewal in 10.2.5. These naming schemes are getting terrible. But we have the Dragon Isle epilogues. I presume they're just going to have quests that people can do that tie up some loose ends. I hope they properly tie up how the Dragon Isles awakened, what triggered that, who triggered that. So I would like to see that, but I have no complaints if they're adding stuff like this. This whole patch itself, inclusion, not what's in it, but just the inclusion of this patch outside of some additional main content patches or just a pre-patch alone that we've had historically where we only got a pre-patch. So this is a bonus really. Reclamation of Gilneas. That's a bonus for if you're Alliance player. That zone's actually amazing. I've actually done the opening zone to that back in the day. I don't know if it's any different when they introduced the Worgens. The atmosphere of that zone is actually pretty nice, if I'm completely honest. So if you're an Alliance player, I think that'll be good for you. I'm hoping that will also mean we'll have some sort of reclamation of the Goblin starting zone. It's just something interesting to have into the game as flavour, that's what we like. Dragon riding worldwide, to my understanding, this is your existing dragon flying mounts that be using in the Dragon Isles, usable outside of the Dragon Isles, so Azeroth and beyond. But this is not dynamic flying, you can't use your other flying mounts as dragon riding. Follower dungeons. Now this was a big surprise, this wasn't even announced at BlizzCon, we didn't even know about this. And I'm going to make a separate video going over the parallels to that and the Final Fantasy XIV trust system. Now just to go over that as briefly as I can, both systems are basically allowing you to have bots in your party. There's wildly varying differences with the way Warcraft doing it and the way 14 Final Fantasy they're doing it, which is Warcraft is letting you pick which role you want to be your bot in your party of 5, but only the system currently is only going to work with the Dragon Isles or Dragonflight dungeons, while in Final Fantasy XIV is all or nothing. You either you go in a system with trust only, or you're in a party of only people. But to just go over this, the biggest key element to me isn't that. It's actually the way, and people aren't talking about this, is how the dungeons are designed in both games. I am a long-term player of both Warcraft, though I'm a retired raider, but I am a long-term player of Final Fantasy XIV since the 1.0 days. And let me tell you, the structure of the dungeons in Final Fantasy XIV has changed immensely. And the way they're structured now in the last 2 expansions, I would say, from the ground up, they definitely had trust in mind for those dungeons. So Final Fantasy XIV right now has tweaked and amended the past MSQ dungeons and any modern dungeons from the get-go to have trust in mind, not players in mind. They're hyper on the rails, there's no verticality, there's no dropping down, there's no... I'm not saying Warcraft has branching path, but you can avoid mobs if you try to. In Final Fantasy XIV, you cannot do that. You have to kill everything you see en route in order to unlock the next area. Let's look at the Dragonflight dungeons. Even those alone have quite the sort of intricacies, the way there's open world elements, there's staircases and multiple staircases, there's verticality, there's some kind of options. They're not really intended options, but you can take shortcuts in these dungeons. You can avoid a lot of mobs in these places. I just don't know how effective it's going to be in Warcraft. I'm not a fan of these systems. I generally think even in Final Fantasy they really should be player driven, not these systems, because I think down the line it's going to cause more problems within the player base than it will actually solve. The Atherosian archives. I think me and a few other people, when we saw that in this roadmap, we were thinking perhaps finally Blizzard will introduce a system that will give us delivery of the lore tidbits that this game has, because it's really in dire need of it. There's so much story, there's so much lore, there's so much fascination in this whole game that just doesn't get shown, it doesn't get told. We don't have conclusions, or we don't have follow-up that we have some expectation there will be closure. I'm all for mystery and discovery to find out these lore tidbits, but even when you do that, and in my experience, once you find this interesting piece of text, interesting little bit of lore around the world, it kind of just ends there. What this system is actually a new world event that players can group together or do with just other players around. We'll see what that entails when it drops and see what they actually intend, but from my understanding, this there is a reward structure to this, which is not tied to player power in any way, and actually just hold me out here. That's fine, because what we see in this roadmap completely negates the need for that patch to have any player power. If we move on, we've got 10.2.6. We'll assume whatever Skull and Bones will have. Could be pirates, could be the Day of the Dead. I'm theorizing it's something to do with the undead, Forsaken, and whatever that could be. Now this one, I think this one surprised a lot of people in terms of time frame. We know there's always an alpha before the beta and obviously before the expansion drops. But that's really early. This is between winter and spring. I was honestly anticipating this to be at the end of spring going into summer. So that's a really early alpha, and if they can do that, go all power to them. The Dragonflight raids revisited. This is all the old raids scale up to basically your current item level, so you can't just like floor it. Prefer them to have a new set of raids, even if they might be not relevant to the main narrative campaign. If they were just side raids, and they kind of have done that in the past, it's not tied to some sort of the actual narrative campaign. It would have been nice just to say, here's this place that has annoyingly strong monsters and we need you to help clear it out. That would have been fine. Reusing assets is fine for something like this. I'm sure the battle team at Blizzard that designs the raids has ideas and implementation of the bosses, more of them than they actually add to per tier. I'm pretty sure there's excess bosses they have that was never seen for players' eyes they can introduce like that. I'm sure of it. And this is what I mean by the catch-up open world rewards. Then they're not ending there. Blizzard are not ending there. We've got another patch. Now, I was thinking this was the pre-patch. It's not, that's the patch after. But let's just go over something here. So this is Dark Art 10.2.7. The fact that we're having some narrative aspects before the pre-patch resolves one of Blizzard's weakest points in World of Warcraft, which is how we exit and enter the expansions as it were. We have the most terrible way of exiting an expansion, because when we get the pre-patch and going into the new expansion, it's very abrupt, very jarring. Systems get reset. If they're sticking to the more traditional style gameplay where we want to evolve what we have instead of resetting it all and having a narrative experience where we exit smoothly, what we see here is probably the precursors. And if we look at what's included in there, we've got the time running pandemonium. Now, anything with the word time usually involves infinite dragonflights in World of Warcraft. What that entails, I have no idea, haven't looked that far. I don't know if Blizzard's even released any information for that. Then we've got the Harbinger quests, which I think a lot of us are speculating this is Zalatash. And I would probably agree to that with some sort of, with the hints Blizzard have already given about Zalatash involvement from the War Within. I'm going to say it's that. And if that is the precursor quest that leads the narrative experience out of Dragonflight and then within Dragonflight itself, the War Within itself, that's good going, Blizzard. We've got then, this is the interesting one. We've got the beta between the spring and the summer, between what I call the precursor and the pre-patch, which has the system changes that we're getting in War Within. I say system changes. Some of the systematic additions, like warbands, the dynamic flight, guild updates, and they're not putting it here, but the talent, any update to the talent tree is what we see here. Between when the beta is and when they intend for the next expansion, that's pretty short. They have a very early alpha, but a very, what looks to be a short beta, and I'm surprised with that one. So how do we conclude this 2024 roadmap? Well, Blizzard, hopefully they deliver this. Currently in Dragonflight they have, and I'm going to be completely honest, with a lot of hopium and copium, I would say they will be able to stick with this. There's kind of no reason for that now. They now have, what I understand, under a very good helm. Holly Langdale has really got a lot of structure and organisation into his team, and they kind of have to, considering the rough time they've had. The fact that they can detail this information to us this soon, if I'm honest, is great. It's bold because they never really did this. They've really stepped up their communication game, and I think, like me and many other players, will really appreciate that. That's what we wanted. We wanted to know what was around the corner, and I hope Blizzard continue to release roadmaps year on year on year, and I hope with the patch calendars they just add more to it, and sometimes we see surprises. So good going, Blizzard.